Hi, hello. I'm so glad I'm here. I think I've had those pre-talk nights the last 2 days where I've not been able to make it to this thing for like every kind of reason that Dreamland begins to show me, and I've kept like waking up thinking I've missed it. So hopefully this time it's actually happening and I'm actually here. This presentation has this potentially awkward, long, jumbly title that I'll explain a bit better once I've started. It's the title of a dissertation that I submitted last year when I was doing an MSc in Creative Arts and Mental Health at Queen Mary University of London. And what happened was, before that, I had the amazing opportunity to work on this TV show called Pablo. I wasn't a researcher at that point, but I'd been really interested in studying art therapy and becoming an arts therapist, which I tried to do, but which didn't work out because of some reasons. And I was actually trying to get a formal autism diagnosis at that point so that I could access study support because of the system. But anyway, I found out about Pablo, and I'd have these video calls about it where I'd sometimes not say much on it because I didn't say much at the time, even though I'm saying loads right now. And I'd type out a lot of feedback about the stuff that I was looking at, and then all of a sudden I ended up writing and voice acting on it too, and time seems to have engulfed itself since then. So I thought a lot about the way that I think a lot before that, and I'd known a lot about the probably autistic things about me, but I hadn't thought about them through this now I have a diagnosis weirdness, not bad weirdness, sort of interesting weirdness, the kind of weirdness that any previously resistant to labels now I have on what have I done creatures might identify with, if there are any out there. So after working on Pablo, I had the opportunity to study again. I wanted to explore something about autistic inner worlds, and so I decided my dissertation on Pablo, seeing as it kind of led me there. The reason I'm sharing all of this is not only to give context to the study, but also because I felt it was important to express that I wasn't sure if I had the type of brain to be able to be a researcher or to do an MSc, which is ridiculous because I did one and I did it quite well, I think, and I really loved doing it. I was really lucky to find a course where I could look at critical mental health things and sciencey things, as well as being able to do live art and performance as a part of it, and to be in a position to be able to do the course as well. And the reason I'm still talking about this is because I think it's important for people to know that there are many ways of being a researcher or doing academic things. You definitely don't need to be a part of university course to do valuable research, but even when you are, if it is something you do want to do, with the right support, you can form your own neurodivergent way of exploring what you're interested in and to learn how to do research about it. And the more neurodivergent people who are enabled to do that, the better, I think, particularly for research about neurodivergentness. So now on to what I actually did. So during 2015 to 2018, I was a part of a creative team writing and voice acting for the TV show Pablo, which was on screens in 2017. Pablo is a preschool animated show about an autistic child named Pablo who uses their inner art world to express, process, understand and play. Exploring through their art world allows Pablo to find solutions to difficulties he's facing in the outer world scenario set up at the beginning of each episode by understanding more about his feelings or about how to approach situations, and also to enjoy adventures through his imagination. Pablo's art world features 6 animal-shaped imagination friends: Tang, giraffe, wren, Noah, llama and mouse, known as the book animals, and they all represent different parts of Pablo, who is autistic. They reflect various parts of autistic processing, and they all coexist within Pablo. So this study was initiated by my personal observations about working on Pablo as an autistic person, exploring, expressing and translating my experiences through the model of the show. I noticed that the creative experience that Pablo goes through in the episodes was mirrored in the writing process. Whilst each episode shows Pablo entering his art world with his paper and his crayons, resulting in a space to express and explore his thoughts and feelings through and with his book animal imagination friends, each story also involved an autistic person expressing and exploring their thoughts and feelings through the creative writing space of writing for the show, through dialogue and interactions between themselves and the characters within Pablo's inner world. Observing my own experience on the show, I recognised this process as being personally significant to the parallel journey of developing my understanding of and communications about autistic experiencing. So by conducting this study, I hope to discover what other autistic contributors' experiences of working on the show might reveal about the creative process behind the making of Pablo in relation to their imaginative autistic experiencing, their self-understanding and understanding of autism and about being autistic, and their mental wellness. These insights would signify the productiveness of this style of writing and or thinking beyond Pablo as a TV show, but to establish how replicating the creative process behind the show might be beneficial for autistic people to learn about and communicate about the way that they think. So some context about the show. Pablo was created and produced by Grania McGuinness from Paper Owl Films. Her initial aim of the show prior to it being made was for people to know more about what it's like to be autistic, primarily for non-autistic people to understand about autistic experiencing, in the hopes of autistic people being better understood and having a better experience growing up in the neurotypically majorified world. She explained that, quote, the idea was to create a show that put the traits of autism on screen so that through the exposure to the traits of autism, the young audience watching and their co-viewers would come to understand more about what that experience was, and through understanding, then empathise with it when they go into school. Pablo's the first animated series to feature an autistic writing and voice cast. Grania wants to produce stories from autistic perspectives, so, quote, you had to have an autistic writing team because how else would you do that? The writing team was led and mentored by an experienced scriptwriter of children's animation, Andrew Brenner. His research process for the show involved seeking an inside autistic perspective of autism. He said, I did a lot of reading and I realised what I needed was autobiographical material, things that autistic people had written. This then led to him thinking, I can't do this just on the basis of reading things or looking at other people's opinions. I need a team of people who can write from their own experience. So just a note to say what I mean when I say psychoeducation, I mean learning about the self in order to provide a way of communicating and understanding with self and other. This also involves enabling the possibility of intervening or solution building for any difficulties that may arise, though equally growing awareness of non-difficulties and joy. Psychoeducation has been defined as being a form of therapeutic intervention that combines psychotherapy and education. That's a quote by Leffler et al. So the writing process of the show Pablo was not intended to be psychotherapeutic or educational. The aim of it was for the stories of an autistic character to be told by autistic people who knew what it was like to be an autistic child in order to create Pablo's inner world. However, for me, the process of reaccessing and re-observing childhood experiences while acknowledging and discussing autism, which was essential to consulting and writing stories for the show, involved elements of both of these things due to the transformation of inner self perceptions whilst visualising them through the lens of observing autisticness. Finding stories to tell through Pablo and his inner world with the context of autism meant learning about which parts of my experiences were particularly relevant to autisticness. Creating stories involved exploring each story through each book animal's perspectives, which mirrored my own internal processes. It involved allowing the dialogue to perform itself through the form of creative storytelling play, which then gave access to exploring interactions, inner thoughts and emotions of autistic processing. That's a part of my natural processing because I'm quite an imagination-y person who processes through voices and characters and planet things and emotions and energies. But I was keen to find out about other people in the creative team's experiences who maybe didn't think in that way, to understand about how their processes related with this process of the show. I also wondered if the process could be a way of guiding others through thinking about the sometimes contradicting, conflicting ways in which they feel or interact through a set of characters if they didn't already have their own. So I'm now going to go back to that jumbly title and jumble it a little bit. Psychoeducation through inner world exploration. By that I mean exploring inner worlds by valuing exploring inner worlds as a psychoeducational tool. Using inner world play as a tool to help understand more about, help people understand more about themselves and the way that they think. And then with the creative process behind the show, I'm focusing on things like multiplicity, thinking through different characters who internally coexist, becoming aware of different parts of the self and selves, and creating stories by thinking about an autistic character who is himself entering an inner world. And then self-awareness, thinking about the way you think, awareness of autisticness, social understanding, understanding about other people, learning about interactions between self and others, and mental wellness, so not being unwell and preventing unwellness. They're the things that I was sort of looking at whether this process could be a tool for. So for this study, I interviewed 5 autistic adults of varying combinations of roles, which included contributors of stories or story ideas, writers and actors, and combinations of those things. It was a non-clinical sample, although I did acknowledge that whilst autism isn't a mental illness, there may have been co-occurring mental health conditions, and some of my questions may have been triggering or upsetting. So I made sure that participants knew that that was going to happen, that there might be questions about thinking about the self and mental unwellness. I had hoped to interview some younger participants, but I didn't get ethical approval to interview under 16s, but I did get ethical approval to interview adults, so that's what I did. The full methodology is on the full dissertation document, including the forms that I sent out. So I find forms difficult to understand a lot of the times, so I wanted to try and make them as accessible as I could, and I included audio versions of the information sheets, and I also explained all of the wordy consent forms, because the participants knew who I was because I'd worked on the show, and that could have been an advantage, as it might have been more comfortable for people to talk with me in the interviews, but I didn't want them to feel pressured to take part because of this, so I also told them that they could contact their head writer or the producer with their permission if they didn't want to tell me personally that they didn't want to be involved. So I asked questions about relation with characters. I asked questions to find out about how the contributors related to the characters in the show whilst writing and or voice acting, and how this compared to other characters they might have related to, ones they'd created or from books or movies or other TV shows. And I asked about how their young child experience related to Pablo's experience, being that Pablo is a young preschool child character. I also asked about their sense of imagination, if it's something they had as a child and if they still had a sense of that now. I asked whether they created inner world characters like Pablo does, and whether they felt their own imagination world a help or a hindrance to their mental well-being. I then asked about their storytelling process experience, about how much of their experiences were reflected in their storytelling or in episodes that they had watched, as some participants had contributed more stories than others. I asked if the process of story writing through Pablo had changed their sense of their own experience described in the story. And then I asked about development of their autism understanding and autistic identity. I asked about their relationships to their autism diagnosis before, throughout, and after being involved in the show, and whether this had changed as a result of being a part of the show. I asked how useful it was to be a part of the show to explore their own thinking or way of communicating. I asked how relevant being amongst other autistic writers and actors was to their experience of working on the show. So the responses shared by the participants were detailed and generous responses, which unfolded many possible pathways of analysis related with autistic creative imagination and the process of story writing and acting on a show presented from the inner perspective of an autistic child. The transcripts themselves and even the organised coded lists of quotes are what I'd associate with Stephen J. Taylor et al.'s description in their Introduction to Qualitative Research Methods, quote, rich descriptive data, people's own written or spoken words, their artefacts and their observable activities, unquote. The data speaks for itself in a lot of ways, from autistic people speaking for themselves rather than people who aren't autistic speaking about them, which is often the case in research. As an autistic person, the data speaks to me and I'm listening with it. So the full data section is available to read online, but I have squashed some things into 3 points from the jumbly title from earlier. So thinking about a tool for self-awareness, I'm going to read some of these quotes, which are written in the way that the autistic participants wanted to talk about themselves and about being autistic. All participants described learning more about themselves from working on the show. And these are some of the quotes. It made me think more of like getting to know myself more. Pablo actually gave me an opening to look at a different angle about how my mind worked. Growing up, I didn't really know exactly who I was really, and they said that their experience on the show helps them understand who they were mentally. Someone described the character they voiced has taught me more things about me. Being with other autistic people as part of the team was described as being, it's sort of more like a window into how I've been. And someone else said, as I read the scripts, I actually started to understand there's actually more of my like me in the characters or in some of the stories than before. I was kind of surprised that I didn't notice this. And then here are some quotes in relation to social understanding. By sharing our insights about autism with each other, we gained a greater understanding of the general autistic experience. It's cool that us and our partners have different traits. It's a collective experience of different people on the spectrum, of different realities, different views, and different experiences on the spectrum. Anybody, if they wondered if they're on the spectrum, say they're 20, 30, 40, 50, so on, and wondered, and they'll hopefully think, hey, I can identify myself with giraffe, or, well, that's all right, I'm glad I don't have to identify myself with giraffe. I'd probably identify myself with, say, mouse, or wren, or Noah, llama, something like that. I'm more aware of the signs of autism when interacting with others as a result of my time on the show. Since I began working with my fellow writers and observing the different ways autism manifests in them, I've become more observant of others in my daily life, and sometimes I see autism in certain people more clearly than I would have before. I think watching the show has made me more understanding and sympathetic to others on the spectrum, that what makes us different from others is nothing to be ashamed of, that we should embrace such differences. So a lot of these showed an understanding, not that they were different because of being autistic, but that autistic people were different to each other, that some autistic people think in different ways to other autistic people. And one participant shared about the way thinking through the sense of characters in the show was, quote, a good way of communicating with people and also to be social to people who find it very difficult to be social, unquote, evidencing that the show also helps autistic people to gain understanding of other autistic people. They explained, quote, in the series Pablo, each character has their own type of autism. So if I meet somebody who's maybe like giraffe in a way, liking random facts, I would talk in the same way as them. Or if I meet someone who's like mouse, who likes things to be very quiet, I would interact with them in the same way as mouse would. This was a significant result of the study in that it highlights the value of thinking through characters as a way to relate and emphasises the importance of having a variety of autistic characters on screens who respond in different ways and have different ways of being. It reflects the purpose of on-screen presentation, not only being for people to see aspects about themselves in films and TV, although that too, but also the impact of that in terms of social understanding and human experiencing. And then these are some quotes about autistic imagination as a tool for mental wellness. My imagination world has always helped me. It was described as being escapism, for times to go away for a bit and just to relax, a therapeutic place to visit, away from real life anxieties, a way of trying to integrate myself into the world as opposed to escaping from it. And then one participant described a Pablo character being prepared to help them as companionship in self-isolation in preparation for the first COVID-19 lockdown in 2020. Imaginative processing experience was described as being comforting. And some people gained new neurology-related terminology for experiences and found this valuable. They said that by identifying and naming these elements and basing stories around them, they learned how to cope with them better than before. And there was also quotes about permission to be. So one person described embracing flapping, saying, I often found that quite fun to do at times, and sometimes I would often do it every now and again. And someone said, it's kind of helped me to bring more characters out that have often been shut in every now and again, that just want to be heard. I'm just going to skip the slide. So solo roleplay was seen as a creative tool. 4 out of 5 participants described that. And And here are some quotes about that. "I would lose myself in my imagination. I would play out imaginary movies I one day hope to make within my own head. Imagine one person imagined having their own radio show, pretending to be a DJ in the quiet room to sort of cheer myself up whilst having a terrible time at school. One person described lining up toys in particular styles, explaining that they had different ways of doing this depending on which character they were being, including characters from Pablo. And someone described the inner mind conversations with characters responding to each other during the writing process as being just like a solo role play. So this relates to this quote by Manning and Manning about abstract and logical thinking being the conscious construction of a mindscape and the excursion of a self. The solution to the problem comes about by the self interacting with the mindscape, and by that self observing the outcome of processes within the mindscape. And that's a comparable description of what happens when Pablo enters his art world, and potentially what some participants described about their process. So I recognised that the process was engaging in a creative process about a character who is also engaging in a creative process, which I find significant to this. So I'm just going to skip through these slides because I'm coming to the end of my time, but multiplicity was also a key part of this, and Polly Samuel recognised Polly Samuel, who's known through her work as Donna Williams, who was one of the early consultants of the show. She recognised that multiplicity is a human phenomena, saying that she described it as being uncommon but normal split brain phenomena. She described patchwork people who are accommodated within society in contrast with others whose environment, opportunities and social acceptance don't fit. Legion theory appreciates the characteristics of dissociative identity disorder as being important to human psychology, overseeing these processes as providing a model for many psychological phenomena, including but not limited to abstract logical thinking. And so I kind of I would like to see this process as not being associated with dissociation, or if it is, dissociation to associate, and association as reassociation. I'm just going to pause here just to show you the post-dissertation submission chaos state after I submitted my dissertation. This dissertation had there's so many things that I would like to sort of take from it and expand, and even in this presentation itself, I'm learning to be a researcher by trying to be a researcher. So this is very much a squashed summary, but the full version is available to read online, and hopefully I'll make further presentations about it. But as a conclusion, the diversity of the book animals express diversity of people and of autism experiences generally, and the variety of experience that any one person can have within themselves. It helps people to learn that being autistic is not just one type of experience, not even within the same person, not even within the same day. And someone said that people watching the show would hopefully think, hey, I can identify myself with giraffe, or well, that's all right, I'm glad I don't have to identify myself with giraffe. Pablo can remind people that there are multiple ways to express, and therefore multiple ways to be accepted, a core aspect of psychoeducational tools for mental wellness, particularly for autistic people, but for all people, that they have permission to be themselves, however many selves that may be. Thank you for listening.